All right, so now we're going to flip and have another conversation on U.S.-Nigeria relations with the visit of the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, yesterday. Ayo.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. We have with us here someone who is going to help us deal with that issue. Always the Nigeria-U.S. relationship is one that's been on for, of course, many years. And so the visit of Mr. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, of the U.S. is something that everyone has been talking about for a bit. Plus, his conversation, his joint press conference with Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday. Mr. Bayo Oluwake joins us this morning. He's a global affairs analyst. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Well, a quick conversation, first of all, about what your take is on the essence of that visit. But before you do that, let's take a look at this report.
The convoy of the United States Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken, arriving at the forecourt of the presidential villa. He's received by the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who leads him into a meeting with President Bola Tinubu. The bilateral meeting holds behind closed doors. Moments later, Mr. Blinken emerges in the company of Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister to provide details on the discussions.
They range from food security to agriculture, to pharmaceuticals, to security itself in the region. And President Bola Ahmed Tinubu brought up the issue of Nigeria's membership and participation in the G20, as well as the United Nations Security Council.
Africa has shaped our past. It is shaping the present. It will shape our future. The United States is committed to strengthening genuine partnerships on the continent, to work to solve shared challenges, and also to deliver on the promise and the fundamental aspirations of our peoples. Nigeria, as Africa's largest country, largest economy, largest democracy, is essential to that effort. American companies are eager to partner with and invest in Nigeria's economy, particularly in the tech sector. We have tech giants that are teamed up with Nigerian partners to help meet President Tinubu's 1 million digital jobs initiative. Other companies are hard at work laying undersea cables, using satellite technology to expand access to the internet. Our tech incubators are fostering Nigeria's next startups. Our venture capital companies are working to finance them. So we want to work in partnership to help drive Nigeria's technological revolution, which is creating jobs, it's growing businesses, and it's spurring innovations in both of our countries. We very much appreciate Nigeria's leadership in ECOWAS to try to move to a return to the constitutional order and democracy in Niger after it's been disrupted. And we talked about building on the important summit that President Tinubu shared in December to try to see Niger get back onto the continent.
The Secretary of State also addresses questions on supporting Nigeria's fight against insecurity and the drive for new investment from the United States.
We are working to support Nigeria. We're working to support our Lake Chad region partners to strengthen the capacity of their security forces in a whole variety of ways to deal with insecurity. And yes, that does go to equipment, to technology, to weapons.
Well, one of the statements made there by Mr. Antony Blinken, Mr. Oluwake, is Africa has shaped our past, it's shaping our present, it will shape our future. What do you make of that?
He's factually correct. But I hope it wasn't just diplomatese. It's factually correct in the sense that Africa is the cradle of human civilization. And all the, technology, for example, embalming of dead bodies, advancement in medicine, they were all in Africa, it's documented. So he's right when he said Africa shaped our past. Is Africa shaping our present? I don't particularly agree. I think Asia is shaping our present.
No, I think he's talking about Africa shaping the present of the U.S.
I take it to mean that he was saying Africa has shaped the global, the global environment. So if I'm right, then it will mean that, yes, I think Asia is shaping the present, but Africa will shape the future because the dynamics and all the indices are in favor of Africa. You know, most vibrant population, young population that's growing. If you look at all the demographic statistics or forecasts that have been given, Africa is going to be perhaps, have one of the largest vibrant and productive populations, very soon. So to that extent, I agree. And that's what you asked me, so that's my take.
But then, how about, some of the contributions that have been promised by the U.S., some of the supports, questions were asked of them at the press conference yesterday about the U.S. intervention or not, U.S. contribution to the conversations going on in Niger and a number of other countries in the Sahel that are occupied by, non-democratic leaders. What's your take on all of that intervention and support that Nigeria is purportedly getting from the U.S.?
I think that, first of all, at the moment, the U.S. is engaged, or rather, I think the U.S. is seemingly overwhelmed by, one, its engagement in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and now its engagement in the Israel-Hamas conflict, and then, of course, its engagement in the unfolding developments in the Red Sea. The efforts being made by forces in that region to influence developments in Gaza, but of course they are acting on the Red Sea. So the U.S. is actively engaged in all of those places. And I think the visit of Mr. Blinken is essentially to demonstrate that the U.S. has not relegated Africa off its radar and hasn't taken Africa off its radar. Basically, that's the way I see it. So now if you come from there to look at what the U.S. could do in terms of all the, stability or stabilizing West Africa, I think that we will really need some time to delve into that, simply because we have certain developments that are yet to be completely stabilized. Take Libya, for instance. We know that what happened in Libya was instigated by the Euro-Atlantic powers, and the consequences of what we are suffering in the Sahel, and even in our own part of the sub-region, is directly or indirectly also influenced by what has happened in Libya. So to deal with all of these issues, Libya has to be pacified. Okay, and even though we are talking of West Africa, we will not stabilize West Africa if we don't pacify Libya, and if we do not deal with what is unfolding in Sudan. Don't forget that the only country separating West Africa from Sudan is Chad. If we do not keep Sudan stabilized, given the fact that you have a multiplicity of armed groups in Sudan, and given the proximity of Sudan culturally and all that to some other countries in West Africa, I think we will not be dealing completely with the issue. So the U.S. has to play more roles in those theaters to stabilize those theaters, and then whatever will be done in West Africa will have more, impact. Otherwise, trying to deal with the end of the stream while not addressing what is coming upstream, I think, will be difficult.
Interesting. But, back at home, Nigerians are more concerned or interested in economic benefits, growth of the country. One of the ways in which the previous federal government tried to deal with the Naira-dollar issue was to measure the relationship between Nigeria and China, for instance, in terms of economic activities, consequent upon which they came up with the idea of the currency swap. Do you see that kind of thing affecting, if the government decides to go on with it, or with any other country at that? Do you see that kind of thing impinging on Nigeria-US relationship?
I think first we look at the trade volume. between Nigeria and the United States. In 2022, our exports were 5.2 billion. I think our imports were 5.4 billion. We've had a trade deficit with the US of $177 million. I don't know what the figures for 2023 are, but for 2022, deficit of 177 million. At one point, the US was our largest importer of Nigerian oil. She's no longer that. So our trade with the US has been declining, while our trade with countries in Asia have been going up. At a point, India was our largest oil, was the largest oil importer from Nigeria. I don't know whether that is still the case. So you will see that in terms of comparison, we are tending more. Our trade with Asia is growing. Even if you look at defense, because we've had security issues in Nigeria, so in the last 5-6 years, we've had to buy a lot of equipment, devices, and platforms. Previously, we used to buy predominantly from Western countries, United Kingdom, Italy, and the United States. Okay? Yes, maybe the Air Force of recent, we have bought a lot from the US, the Super Tucanos, and now we're buying some helicopters from them as well. So, but largely, our trade with the US has been declining, our trade with Asia, and in fact with Europe basically, while our trade with Asia has been going up. And that is what is going to continue, because Asia is the powerhouse. So it depends on what we really want, how we see our relationship with the United States going, and how we denominate that relationship, and then, or whether we want to rejig or revive or create new frontiers in that relationship. But otherwise, the figures are pointing towards Asia, and understandably so. The US will want to enhance relationship with us, because US is also in the global marketplace, is competing. Just like you saw the German Chancellor visit Nigeria suddenly, not too long ago, looking for gas, because they no longer get gas from Russia. So we need to now denominate and determine in what direction. Even though our trade with Asia is growing bigger than trade with the Euro-Atlantic powers, there are still a lot of things we can do with the Euro-Atlantic powers. And I think that is part of what has informed the visit of Antony Blinken.
Do you see the 4Ds, the federal government's 4D foreign policy play out in this conversation, in this visit of the U.S. Secretary of State so far, or with any other foreign powers as yet? In other words, I'm saying, how beneficial do you think Nigerians will see this conversation, this visit of the U.S. Secretary of State?
I think, I mean, the U.S. is a dominant power, is a dominant hegemon. So any visit, you know, by especially the Secretary of State, which is a very influential position in the U.S. administration, is welcome. And it signposts it signposts that for us, we are still on the radar, you know, of the U.S. Now, in terms of what the 4Ds of this administration, I'm sure it was discussed in bilateral, you know, off the camera. You know, what we are seeing publicly is a talk about us wanting to get American support to be part of the G20, wanting to get American support to get a seat on the Security Council, and those and so on and so forth. But with due respect, I don't even think these are the issues. We need to secure the territorial space of Nigeria. If we do not secure the territorial space of Nigeria, everything else that we are talking about doesn't fit. Because we need to secure the country. The country has to be stable. And yes, the US can play a role there, you know, not necessarily also only in terms of weapons, but in terms of how it responds. Because it does look like for the US, once there's a disagreement with another state, the first option is military. So we need to influence American policy to shift from that, because when they always make this recourse to the battlefield, it creates so many consequences, some of which they don't bear, and we have to bear that. So I think we need to try to influence US policy in those areas in order to help stabilize our own territory. And then, of course, that doesn't mean some of those issues that we want to advance cannot be advanced. But I think those issues are still a bit far-fetched. I think what is important now is to secure our territorial space and then to create employment for our people to build up that.
It's an ongoing conversation, definitely. Well, Mr. Blinken, we understand, has to go to some other parts of Africa on this history. But we have to thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Bayo Oluwake is a global affairs analyst. Thank you again for your time.
My pleasure.